Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers and dive into an exciting session on developing oracy and maths in Power Maths. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. First, we are recording this webinar and the session will be available on ALP in the classroom support area. Feel free to revisit it or share it with your colleagues afterwards. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat box. This helps us track your queries and ensure we get back to you. At the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session with our presenters. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our presenters. First up, we have Tony, the series editor for Power Math and the founder of White Rose Math. Joining him is Josh, our lead author for the Power Math content. Tony and Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Leon, and lovely to meet everybody. Well, I can't see everybody, but it is lovely to know everybody that's there. I know many people joining us today are already using Power Maths, okay, assuming the majority of people are using Power Maths. So just to give you a bit of a heads up, as the title says, it will be specifically looking at Power Maths, but I know also there may be some schools who are thinking about using Power Maths or using White Rose. I'm still sure you will get things from it as well. So I just want to reassure everybody. I hope you find the session useful. The plan is that I'll just talk around general principles of oracy and Power Maths. Oracy is a big word at the moment in schools and education. I know it's a real focus for lots of schools. So excited to talk about how Power Maths and how you use Power Maths might fit into a whole school agenda. Josh will then come in afterwards and talk about some specifics around lessons and go through at least one lesson, how you might use this and how you might bring in some of the principles that I talk about. I'm also conscious that schools may be using particular strategies at the moment, various things, whole school approaches that they're using. I'm hoping that a lot of the things I talk about fitting with those. So you can be using something across your whole school at the moment. I'm pretty confident that the ideas that I'm talking about within here are you'll be able to apply. So I'll start to get into the main content. Hopefully this will work. So firstly, why would you want to develop oracy in maths? Okay, I think one of the key things is that we know and evidence shows that it can enhance that cognitive understanding. Okay, we know that there's been a massive focus on conceptual and procedural and on all this knowledge and understanding over the past 10, 15 years in maths education, and oracy really can help develop that further. It will support their ability to reason and problem solve by thinking out loud, all that metacognition and everything else. It will also allow them to build confidence in the subject, and it will enhance that mathematical conversation. So there's lots of reasons why it's really important to develop oracy in maths. And I went around about 8 schools who used Power Maths last year, and in every single one of those 8 schools, one of the things that came out as a whole school development was around oracy. So I know it's a massive topic at the moment. So I just want to delve a tiny bit into the top bullet point that you just saw, okay, in terms of the whole cognitive understanding. So firstly, one of the things that it does is it allows us to clarify that thinking, okay? If we can verbalize those problem-solving processes, it will help children organize and clarify their mathematical thinking, okay? And that will help make those abstract concepts more concrete. So that's one of the cognitive benefits of developing oracy. And then it deepens that conceptual understanding as well. Okay, just if children are engaging in those discussions, they're able to connect new information with prior information, and it just helps that deeper understanding and retention rather than just assuming it's going on in a child's head, etc. Verbalizing it will help, and actually it will help strengthen memory. I was reading recently about how speaking aloud can help reinforce learning by engaging that a different cognitive pathway. So all these reasons why we should look at developing oracy, not just in maths, but across curriculum, I think will help that cognitive understanding. And the last one, which I already touched on, is that idea of metacognition. We know from EF and metacognition is one of those things that if we think about thinking and what we're doing and the process in terms of how they arrive an answer, right, we know that leads to a deeper understanding of the mathematical content. So verbalizing a child verbalizing their thinking is going to massively promote that metacognition. So I think that's really important. So I, if we're looking at developing oracy, it's going to massively support children's understanding of key mathematical concepts and the work that they do. So I also appreciate, and I'm sure many schools are finding that it's not easy, really, particularly if you've got students who lack, if you've got children who lack confidence, or it might not have been something that you've had a focus on in the last 5, 10 years. There's a lot to do. There's clearly time constraints, so any things that you're putting into place, any strategies that you put into place, are not going to be embedded overnight, and it's not one of those things that's just going to just quickly change overnight, right? There's a confidence, a teacher as well. There's a teacher confidence about the developing oracy skills in children, curriculum pressures because we've got to get through the content, and I know particularly as we get into like when we get to year 6 and SATs are there in the way at the end of year 6. Really trying to develop some of these skills and processes can be difficult given those curriculum pressures. And then, of course, we've also got with the EL children those language barriers which also present themselves as well. So I appreciate there are so many barriers, there are so many problems that could get in the way, but that does not mean that we shouldn't develop it. So I think it's one of those things where it's not easy. I think we're all in the same position, and all the schools that I worked with last year around this, every one of them is in that similar position. So it's not a worry. It's just something that we just need to take our time about. Now, if you know me well, you know one of the things I'm a big fan of is the use of mini whiteboards, okay? And I think what's really important, and you wanted to pull this out as something that I feel personally is really important, is that this mini whiteboards as a tool to support oracy are key. So if children are communicating their thinking on, say, a mini whiteboard or other whole class device that you want to use, it will help them with that discussion. It will help them organize their thoughts rather than just trying to organize them in their head. The mini whiteboard is still an essential piece of a tool that Josh and I would encourage you to use. Okay, so it just allows getting their thinking down on not just an answer, but the thinking. Okay, often I'll go into schools, and those schools that are doing not just power maths well, but also doing mathematics, teaching for understanding, children are communicating their thinking more on the mini whiteboard rather than just say an answer. And I think that's something I would really encourage. It allows you as a teacher to see what children are thinking about. Okay, you can quickly assess, you can quickly ask children, ask them to articulate their answer aloud. Okay, and it's that giving them that opportunity for that verbal reflection and clarification. I just want to really stress about the use of mini whiteboard can be a really effective tool to support oracy. And of course, what a mini whiteboard and why I love a mini whiteboard is it promotes that participation. If you are asked to, as a pair or as an individual, communicate your thinking on a mini whiteboard, everybody has to. You can't get out of it. And those that don't put anything, it's a perfect opportunity, as you know, as a teacher, to go over and support them. So I just want, because I'm just going to mention the use of a mini whiteboard a couple times, and I just want to just pick out why I feel a mini whiteboard can be seen as a tool to support oracy. So that's just my general intro, and then what I want to do now is just talk 10-15 minutes around each of the sections. So I'll just go through each of the sections in Power Maths, language that you should be used to, a section you should be used to. You might know yourself that you do certain sections better than the others, etc., etc. So I'm just going to talk around each one and hopefully prompt some discussion. And this is how I think you can start to embed oracy into each of those sections. So firstly, as you know, we offer the Power Up, okay? And also in the teacher guide or on the online, if you've got it online, you'll notice you've got these quick recaps. So what I think is really important is the key thing for any pre-work that you do before you maybe go into the main content in this lesson is really think what is the thing that I need children to know before we move into it? What's some of the essential things, and the power-ups and quick recaps help with that. You'll notice that the quick recaps, a lot of them are designed to be discussions, okay? And you can use them as a discussions. But if you're looking to develop oracy in mathematics using Power Maths, really think about those quick recap questions and think about how can I make this into a discussion? And ways in which I know some schools are doing it is, for example, they're trying to turn as many of the quick recaps into, say, a true or false question or a diagnostic question of some description where children have to I think it's true, or stand over here. If you think it's true, stand over here if you think it's false, but also alongside it why. So I've given an example here where it's about put two number cards on the board or around the classroom and ask children to point to the smallest or greatest number. And I think that's where you could firstly have two numbers. Okay, which one do you think is the greatest? Which do you think is the smallest? And why do you think that is the case? Etc. Etc. So I think it's about looking at the key question that maybe you want to know before children get into the content in the quick recap, and then thinking about, all right, how can I turn this into rather than just point to the greatest number, point to the one that's small. Instead of just it's more reasoning with it, true, false, diagnostic questions. So my first bit of advice would be to think about how you can use that and turn it into maybe a question that requires children to give them a fuller response and an explanation. Clearly, you want to keep it quick because it is a quick recap. So don't try and do too much with it, because I think that will then eat into the key time within the lesson. You can encourage complete sentence answers, I think, throughout that, and certainly you'll notice in Power Maths we try and write everything with a full sentence. We provide stem sentences in places as well where we think it's effective. And I'll talk about this all the time, but I know some of you may use different structures like Kagan or Voice 20, depending on what different structures you were. Things like rehearsals in pairs are always really things that you can look at. And then the other thing I just want to pull out is in the notes and guidance in the teacher guide and online is the key language. So language that we're going to use in a lesson, really, that could be, depending on if you're doing anything like word war or wherever you might be in terms of thinking about how you develop language in a classroom, you might want to pull out some of those words and ask children to talk in pairs and then bring it out as a whole class in terms of what these words mean and how can they show them using manipulatives or something along those lines. So thinking about key language, what I will be careful with key language. I went into a school a couple of years ago where they had a lot of vocabulary list at the start, and they ended up just reading aloud what the vocabulary meant. I'm not sure that aided any cognitive understanding. So I think it's just making sure that you think, and I also think it went on a bit too long as well. So just be careful if you are doing vocabulary that there is not too many words. So you're picking out key words that they might need, and there's an opportunity maybe to also not just read a sentence, but really formulate a response and also maybe use manipulative to support it. But I want to really stress about the quick recap and power up is that the fact is you don't want to get too into this, because you want to make sure that you've got time into the main lesson for the new learning. So that's power up and quick recap. So now moving into the main lesson. So as you'll know, every lesson in Power Math starts with this idea of a discover task, okay? And when Josh and I designed Power Maths, that first task was always designed to work and discuss pairs and small groups. It was, yes, absolutely, there can be individual thinking taking place, and individual thinking is important, but we always saw that as a piece of paired or group work. And many schools do it like that, where the paired up, so they're talking to one another, or maybe a group of four, etc., depending on what the question is. And it's about supporting one another. Now, if you've got strategies that you use as a school, partners, whatever that might be, then use those in this section. Okay, I think it's really important to use any structures that you've got within the Discover section, but make sure Discover is about them thinking about the question. Make sure that the whole class understand the questions before you go into it. I see again where power maths is used at its best is where, for example, this scenario here where where the children are having to match up the calculation with maybe the representation. Just make sure the children know what can you see, and I'm sure Josh will go through this when he goes through a lesson really, but really make sure that every single child in that classroom understands it. Have that equipment ready to use. Okay, so if you rather than you want it to be seamless, we always say this, that use of mini whiteboards to communicate that thinking, which I've already mentioned, and then you as a teacher are supporting children as necessary. You know the ones in that lesson, okay, because you can hear them, you can see what they're writing on the whiteboards, and it's that 5 or 10 minute activity where you're really trying to see their understanding, where they're up to, and everything else. So that is how I think there's a lot of potential for Discover to have a lot of discussion, a lot of paired work, a lot of small group work using strategies that you might use whole school as well. And I think it can really reinforce that. I know some teachers like to use Discover in a more explicit way, in terms of explicit instruction way, which is again is absolutely fine. Okay, if you want to do that, but make sure there are those opportunities where it's not just about telling them how to do it, but you're posing those questions as you go along. Again, Josh will go through an example later on, which is a bit more specific. Share, well, I think share's all in the name. Okay, so in Discover, they've had a go at the task. Okay, you've supported them as necessary, and then it's time for them to share their responses. Okay, this is where the whole class you're taking the responses, how they've done, etc. Uh, I think there's a great opportunity here to look at the different ways to solve the problem. So again, I think I've mentioned this before on a webinar where I've seen some great schools where they'll have pictures of the children or names of the children, and this is child X's method, and then child Y's method for answering a question. They come up to the board, they explain what they do. Again, these are all simple things to develop confidence in mathematics, to develop that oracy, and it's different children each time. And hopefully in the Discover task, you will picked up on which children have managed to solve the problem well, which children have struggled a tiny bit, so you can really pick up on those. But it's really important to share. There's an opportunity to talk about and discuss the different problems and make that modeling explicit. I can't stress this enough. I think if you as a teacher model the language that you want children to use, and you correct children if they're sharing their responses as well, this is essential to develop those skills, that metacognition, that understanding. If you're talking about the thinking, that will help children know what thinking they need to be doing. Oh, that's how you get to that problem. What do you think about that? How did you get there? It's a lot of those why and how type questions that you need to be posing children more, and that will gain a confidence. Again, there's nothing, hopefully, in the Discover task. You could have asked some of those questions so that it can rehearse answers in pairs. So they should be ready in the share to share what their thinking is. There are lots of characters, and again, Josh will talk about this when he goes through this and give hopefully some examples really where you can use the characters to highlight those key points and any misconceptions. That's what those characters are there to do. What's Ash said in this problem, etc., etc. So just bear that in mind. And that opportunity, you are modeling as at the same time as it's what's really important is you as a teacher are doing that modeling of the oracy. You are doing that thinking, oh, what I'm oh, I've got three lots of 12. Okay, that 12 is made up of 1 10 and 2 1s, and so you're all the time modeling that thinking that the children need to be doing. So the share, there's so much discussion in so much opportunity to discover and share to really make sure children are communicating in the right way. But it's all about the questions that you as a teacher ask, and why, how, what did you do? It's about delving a bit deeper. Absolutely no pressures of time. Like I said, that's always a pressure. So it's bearing that all in mind. Think together. So when we, Josh and I designed the Think Together section, this was all about then those worked examples. So we've just gone through a bit of, we've gone through a small task, and then we've looked at how we solved it. And then Think Together is to try and apply that knowledge that maybe we've just learned and start to reinforce that knowledge. And when what we've always said with Power Maths, if you've joined the webinars before, is that it's very difficult to get this right for all the number of schools, the thousands of schools that are using Power Maths. So sometimes you may need to supplement things with other questions, but again, question one was always designed to be more about the teacher guiding the children through a gradual process of thinking about their things. So in other words, the idea is that so as a teacher, I'd be explaining this. Can you see the number? You're making it really explicit. Can you see the 4,000s? Oh, we don't seem to have any hundreds here. Oh, okay. Can you see that we don't have any hundreds? And then we've got 4 10s and 3 1s. What number is better? It's this back and forth with the class, but this is question one. We designed it largely to be coming from the teacher. Now you can see I pulled out another example where we've got 1A, B, and C, which are 3 different examples. So you might want question 1A to be a bit more guided, then 1B to be a bit more a back and forth with a class, etc. But what I would encourage more than anything here is that you as a teacher are talking about what you're doing, how you would solve this problem. Talk about that thinking, because that is important, because that will help develop their oracy skills. And I believe I've just talked about that. And then as you move through, okay, this is where that support reduces. So this idea as we move into question 2, 3, and the challenge question, right, this is where actually children are a bit more on their own, working in their pairs or working individually, and that guided practice with the teacher and child working together, but they are doing a bit more, right? And what did you get? How did you get that? It's about picking up on common misconceptions, common errors that maybe children are making, and checking their understanding. But again, it's not just asking what number is 10,000 less than 147,300. 137,300. Why is it that? How do you know? How did you use the place value grid to help you? Or did you use the place value grid to help you? Okay. Could you visualize that in a different way? Do you need to use manipulatives to help you understand that? Again, it's all about encouraging that thought process. Children will mimic and copy in terms of your thought process as well. So just that's why it's really important as a teacher to promote that. And as you know, some of these later questions are designed to be done more independently, but it still doesn't mean that you can't use those structures that you may have whole school. There is so much opportunity in Think Together and your previous sections to talk about questions, talk about how they got there, and again, use that mini whiteboard if necessary to support children rehearsing their answers. I've put together a few more things as well. So, for example, in the classroom ideas, you might want to promote mathematical talk through structured discussions and well-chosen questions. And I think that is what Power Maths is designed to do. Okay, so there's so many questions and I would say this, so many great questions and well-chosen ones that you can use within the Power Maths books. And also, don't forget in the teacher guide, there's lots of detailed questions. So you might just see in the textbook, you might just see one question, but then in the teacher guide, you'll see 3 or 4 questions often, which are a bit more detailed, which will help structure the thinking. So please do use those questions. They are on the Active Learn platform. Use those reason and problem solving questions, particularly as a vehicle for talk, right? So I think it's really important that reasoning and problem solving are that real opportunity for us to get the thinking out. Often the quick what's 3 5s, etc., 15, fine, you can always ask why is it that, etc., but really it's the reason and problem solving type questions that really will drive that oracy and what they're doing. So make sure you're building in plenty of those. And again, go back to the point about if you don't have a classroom at the moment that's maybe rich with mathematical talk, you've got to just start somewhere. Just start in one area. Don't feel you have to do lots. Don't feel you have to do it all overnight, but just start to get them talking about mathematics more. I said mini whiteboards. Mini whiteboards are a great way into starting discussions. Use mini whiteboards as a tool for children to write down their thinking, right there in what's in their head, what are they thinking about at the moment to solve this question, right? Not just the answer. You want to know what they're thinking about. Now tell your partner what you're thinking about, right? So that simple think, pair, share. Very simple strategy, but very effective strategy. There's a reason why strategies like this always do very well in any research and evaluations, etc. Because they do have, we know that thinking leads to long-term learning. If we're actively thinking about a problem, we are more likely to remember what to do, how to do it, etc. And that's why that thinking is so important. I would say, and I always reiterate this because I say it to every school I visit, but do use that structure flexibly. Okay, we never design power maths to be you've got to do every single question, you've got to do it every single right way. And the best schools use power maths a bit flexibly, so they might supplement it with their own questions at times. So, for example, if you know as a teacher you don't have children who are able to work in the hundreds of thousands, and you might want to just give a couple initial questions which are maybe smaller numbers, okay, with less digits. So use it flexibly. As your client, but the whole structure around it, right? The whole structure, try and keep to that, but use parts of it a bit more flexibly. And then you might also want to embed oracy into assessment. There is at the end of every single unit in Power Maths, you'll know that we have an assessment, and that assessment is designed to be largely used as whole class diagnostically. So try and, if you don't do those assessments, because I know a lot of schools don't use those as an assessment, you can use them as a tool to start to think about embedding oracy. So why did you choose this? Who chose A? Who chose B? Who chose C? And why did you choose this, etc. So I think that's a few ideas. And then finally, these are just a bit outside of Power Maths, but I think there is an opportunity to embed maths talk into any whole school oracy frameworks. I know a lot of schools are really trying to embed maths talk talk across the school, oracy across the school. Maths talk is something that's important for all the reasons I've said. And I believe that many of the strategies and things that you'll be doing in other subjects, you can also do in maths. You've clearly got the additional benefit of you've got tools like manipulatives, like place value counters or deans, etc., to be able to really use as a tool to help children explain. And so because in sometimes in other subjects they might not have a tool to help them explain, but in maths you do have tools like that. So use of manipulatives is a great tool to help develop that talk. Use of language, etc. Make sure that putting maths talk into a whole school it's something that should be brought out, because I think it can definitely be developed. There needs to be time. There needs to be time given to developing and embedding oracy. It depends where you are in the journey, but some schools, and in fact, when you go into some schools, some teachers do this better than other teachers, and it tends to come back to, if I'll be honest, sometimes teacher confidence. Really, it's that confidence to wait for an answer. It's that confidence to ask children to work in pairs and think about their answer. So as a teacher, be confident. If you're a leader, give your staff time to embed it. There are simple strategies, simple things that you can do. I remember when I first started out on the maths sub journey and we were looking at what was going on in Shanghai and Singapore, when you compared the number of questions that asked children why was in far excess to the number of questions that we asked in English schools at the time. I know that's developed over time, but I still think we can go further. And why is a perfect opportunity for us to start thinking about full sentence answers and then and coming out with those things. I know some schools are starting to do this, but you might want to look at incorporating oracy into lesson planning. I don't mean anything excessive. I am somebody who's against too much excessiveness in these things, but like I went back at the very start, it's just maybe once you've thought about the lesson, what you're going to do today, maybe just thinking about, right, what questions am I going to ask? There's lots of great questions in the teacher guide, I promise you, that to help develop the and to help children then come out to think about and elaborate on answers to questions. So do use those, but it's just thinking about the questions. If you don't already have some, I think many primary schools already do, but if you don't, I would encourage having a more of a formal structure for peer support. It's really easy just to say to children, look, talk to your peers, but talk in pairs. But I think in schools that I've seen this done better, there's a structure to it. So it doesn't matter what subject they're doing at this time or who they're working with, the children know what that structure is, so that they know that they've got a minute to discuss, a minute to chat. Try and build in those structures, and I've mentioned a couple already. There are plenty out there that you can use, and I would encourage the use of those. I think one of the things I used to love to do is celebrate the right answer, celebrating them telling me with confidence, and I think it's really important, particularly for children who maybe struggle. Really celebrate that success of giving a correct answer, but not just a well-reasoned answer. What a great idea! It could be even wrong, okay, but what a great idea! It doesn't you're celebrating that success. Make use of technology to support oracy. I was in a school about 6 to 8 months ago where they were using iPad. They had the opportunity to use iPads, and they were looking. They used the iPads to just get. They was just starting on their journey, and they found that the iPads and other technology were helping children just develop those oracy skills or speaking skills, because they weren't having to do it in front of the class. They felt like they were doing it just with their friend next to them, but the teacher was able to record it and then review it as well. So I think, and it's a great way then you can build on that over time to be more confident about speaking, maybe in front of the class, whole class, etc. I believe that concludes everything that I want to say. I know there's going to be a question Q&A at this end, and I've probably gone over a couple of minutes, Josh, than I should have. So I do apologise, but I am going to hand over to my colleague Josh now, who's going to just give an example of a lesson, which hopefully will take some of the ideas and exemplify it a bit more.
Thanks, Tony. Great. That was really I enjoyed that. And I just wanted to, while you were talking, I just thought of something that I just wanted to share before I begin. We talk about oracy, and I think sometimes a lot of the focus goes on all of the talking and giving children the tools to talk, giving them the STEM sentences, giving them the questions that are going to make them want to say stuff. I also think oracy is a really good opportunity, and Paramaths has got that in there as well, of giving children opportunities to become really good listeners. And so one of the ideas that Tony was talking about was sharing different ideas, and actually a key part of that is trying to help the children understand that being able to listen to someone else and see something from the problem from someone else's point of view can actually be really powerful. It's not just about projecting their own ideas, it's also about really carefully listening to and then sensitively challenging or querying or clarifying what they think someone said. So I just wanted to mention that because when Tony was talking, it reminded me of that. So I'm just going to share my screen and then hopefully we can get going. And Tony's exactly right. What I've taken is just one lesson from Paramaths. I chose it more or less at random. So I'm hoping that's coming up now. Tara, is that looking all right on the screen there? Thank you. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this. So this was what Tony was finishing with. So what I've done is I wanted to look at opportunities within a specific lesson and how I might plan for oracy. I will say, so I chose a lesson that I don't think I wrote myself. So what I've come to here is I'm using a scheme, and an author has created the components of a lesson for me. One of the slight issues I see is where teachers think, okay, an author has created this lesson, so I must just deliver this and get through each of the stages of this lesson because it's been written by someone who's calling themselves an expert, and therefore they must know best. And what I want to change the thinking around slightly to is an author has created lots of components of a lesson, but it's the teacher that can then construct the lesson from those components in a way that suits the class. and in fact, a teacher could assemble them in any number of different ways, or even in different orders. Sometimes I think the discover task might be so rich, I might want to save it to the end of the lesson. Once we've done some, I might have done some direct teaching through Think Together 1 or Think Together 2, and then go through the lesson, and then right at the end come to the discover task. I think being a little bit flexible with how we think about these components could be open up different avenues, not just for oracy, but for feeling like you're making more confident and more effective decisions for the children in front of you. I also wanted to mention that hopefully we'll see that Power Maths can be compatible with different approaches to oracy, both planned formal approaches. So some schools will be using perhaps a program or something that's given a name. There'll be the different sort of providers out there or different organizations talking about oracy, and they might be using the structures from those with maybe formal roles or STEM sentences for different types of discussion, but also for those spontaneous moments where a teacher or a class have an idea together, or a pupil has an idea and the class want to follow that. And so maybe talk about how we can be flexible with those opportunities too. So I'll just introduce the lesson, and here you can see I've chosen this lesson. It's from year 4, I think. One thing I would often like to do when I'm using Power Maths is present the discover task with, first of all, without question 1A and 1B, so that rather than leaping straight into what's the answer, we've got a bit of time to sit with the context and to have some discussion here. So I've also chosen this one because I think I've just got slight alarm bells for myself as a teacher, thinking, oh, on the one hand, I might think, oh, this is going to be great. I've got loads of football fans in my class and they're going to really like this because it's going to be all about football. And then I've just got this slight alarm bell going off in the background, back of my mind, saying, actually, they might start arguing about, oh, look, I think that's Liverpool because it's all red, against Leeds because they're in that colour. Oh, no, Liverpool's rubbish. Leeds are much better. So this must, Tony, this must be one of yours, being from Yorkshire, I think, this question. But the oracy, the conversation could go down a route where we steer away from the maths. So I've chosen this one because what I want to do is I want to have a rich discussion around this discover task, but I also want to know that I'm curating a discussion which really focuses in on the maths and on the structures we want to talk about. So I might begin with some open questions around what do you see here, or what do you think, what do you notice, what do you wonder? Some of those questions that we can, kind of generic questions. Or can you see any maths in this picture? Can you see what does it make you think of? What do you think the questions might be? Can you think of any good questions we could ask about this? Can you think of a nice easy question to get us going on this? And perhaps you could say, how many players are there in a team, or how many players are there in 2 teams, or something like that. Another reason I like to keep the questions away is because sometimes I think it's really important that we get the children to have the openness to be able to think, well, what operation am I going to need here? If I overly signal all the time, or this is an addition lesson, this is a subtraction lesson, this is a fractions lesson, then they're not given the opportunity to think, oh, I wonder what operation I'll need to use here. And we know that that's really powerful for children to have that discussion and that thought process to be able to choose those operations for themselves, even from a very young age. So here, I'll just move through this. For us, here are the questions. So 1A is there are 6 rows of seats in each section. Each row has 52 seats. How many seats are there in a section? And then 1B is there are 3 sections in the stadium. How many seats are there in total? So even at this stage, actually, I've still open up to the children being able to have to choose for themselves which operations do we need. Tony also mentioned some metacognition and some looking at those strategies. So as well as offering this up as a chance to have an open discussion and then a chance to zero in on the maths through discussion, I could also ask some of the questions that are going to give us some of those metacognitive strategies. So some of the ones I thought of were, well, justify whether you could add, subtract, multiply, or divide in this problem. So that word justify in there means it's more of a formal setting, and that I might have chosen, I really want, rather than just say, I think we need to do this, they need to have a really convincing argument, and they might need to work together, or they might need to try and convince a partner, or they might need to convince the whole table, or they might need to be able to present alternative viewpoints to the class. Because for this one, I could say, actually, I could just use counting, count 1 by 1. That could be an alternative for measure. Or we could add up all of them in this row, and then all of them in this row, and all of them in this row. And actually, they are feasible ways of solving that problem. And so I quite like that as an opportunity for opening up some deeper opportunities for some oracy there. Another question is discuss some possible mistakes someone could make. with this kind of problem. So here we're thinking, oh, perhaps someone would make the mistake of thinking that here means 1 take away 52, 1 subtract 52, or it could be I'm going to do 6 add 52, or perhaps they could say they don't know their 6 times table, so that could be a struggle for them because this is going to be, they have to multiply by 6, and that's quite a tricky one. Or they could recognize, or when they do multiplication, sometimes we have to do exchanging, and that could cause an issue here, and I think there's going to be an exchange in this one, and so on and so on. That's a possible question that's going to, these questions are pushing at, or what do you think about this before we get going, rather than just launching in trying to find the answer. There's another way of asking the same question, so perhaps a brief chat on the two, because we know that sometimes language is a barrier, or sometimes the wordy problems are a barrier. So it could be, oh, can you think of another way of asking this question, perhaps an easier way, or a more understandable way, or how would you ask this question to your friends? You could have that sort of discussion. And then I quite like this perhaps as a small group work or as pairs. We'll suggest a first step for beginning to tackle this. Does everyone on your table agree that would be a good first step, or do people have different first steps? And I'm thinking about this from the point of view of the children. We want them to have a rich lesson. They are going to do some independent work, and having that habit of mind of they might encounter a question and think, I don't know the answer straight away, but having that habit of just saying, well, what's the first step I could try? So I wanted to open up. So there are some kind of more metacognitive kind of prompts that might elicit some good thinking there. I was also thinking, I know that there are some specific roles that people could have in certain oracy frameworks. Actually, I was thinking there is an opportunity here for having some maths roles. So you could give a group the role of being the graphic designers, and it's their idea to come up with a picture that could help solve this problem. You could give another group, so they could be the engineers, and they come up with some hands-on resources that could help you solve the problem. You could have a group of doctors, and their job is to resolve any issues there are solving this problem. And I was thinking about that might be fun to play with there. And so then they've got to work together, not on answering the question, but on finding different, looking at different avenues around working with a problem. I just thought of that when Tony was talking. That's why it's not on here. Right. As Tony said, we then go to the share. So I was looking at, are there opportunities for discussion here? So I've just clipped this bit out of the share, and this might be something I'm thinking, right, here is the written method I want the children to be working on, and perhaps this is something that as a teacher, I've decided this is where I need to be absolutely clear. I want to do some direct instruction around this, and the children have had different ideas around the room, but this is where I want to get to. However, I might decide, you know what, first of all, I'm going to get groups to share their ideas, and they're going to come up and demonstrate them. And as Tony said, I'm going to model some of the language they could use to make that really, really clear. Or it could be that I begin with this, and then I ask them to share their ideas and see which one of their ideas are the same as this, which ones are different from this. Also, in the share page, there are some opportunities for, this is the diagram that goes with it here. And when I pair these together, there are opportunities for saying, look, I want you as a table to look at this and to tell me, how does this picture of the counters and how does this written calculation over here, it looks to me like we can assume they're both 312 is going to give us the total, but how do they relate to each other? And why is this group here been circled like that? And then what's this mini one down here? Where can I find this in my diagram over here? And just ask some of those minute questions. And so I've given them the answer. I've given them the pictorial representation. I might say, oh, could you know what you said, could you get some place value counters and just show me where my little one is and how it fits in with this diagram over here, and just justify that around with your table, or convince me that anyway. So that's possible there with the share, where I've got different ways that I could approach this. I could choose a really clear direct instruction first and then have their ideas feed into it, or I could go with their ideas and have some direct instruction. Whichever way around I do it, I've still got the opportunity of asking these questions about, well, this 3 here, where is that in my diagram over here? Because it looks like it's actually 4 columns. That seems slightly odd. So what am I going to, where's that in that diagram? Anyway, so there's those sorts of opportunities. And then I think it's also worth mentioning that when we were in the first version of Power Maths, we had 1A and 1B as questions for the Discover. And they used to be kind of separate. Often 1B was just an extra question, whereas now there's a flow from 1A to 1B. So hopefully there's a good progression, and actually a good teaching progression from 1A into 1B. Likewise here, this share for 1B, I could ask the children, oh, you know how we had that conversation before about how the place value counters and the written method were side by side? Just, I'm going to leave that to you now. Could you just work with a partner, or work with a table, or look here, I've got these 3 10s here. Where's that come from? Can you just convince ourselves, were we on the right lines before? Anyway, so that's all there in the share for that lesson. There are plenty of opportunities for asking quite open questions and asking really, really focused questions, but each of those should give us an opportunity to have some good responses to it. I've got Think Together 1 here. Now, what we've tried to do all the way through is that Think Together 1 is a really, really clear way of developing some fluency in the main concept of the lesson. So Think Together 1 here, I might be saying, do you know what? I can't use all of these different oracy techniques all the way through the lesson. This is one where, and they might get into the habit of knowing it. Think Together 1 is where this is our moment to really get really good at listening. And this is where I'm going to do an I do, or whatever we want to call it. And I'm going to really clearly show you my thinking, and I'm going to talk you through my thinking. After you've listened to my thinking, I'm going to welcome any questions from you. But I think Together 1 might be an excellent place where they develop their listening skills, and then they develop their questioning skills and ask you questions. Well, okay, right. So I think you said this. I didn't quite follow when you said this. Could you repeat that, please? And I say, great, thank you for asking that question. I'm pleased with that. Also, as we'll see, this could be an opportunity where we think about, here are the hands-on materials. They're presented to us in the book. But just bearing in mind that all the way through, it's a really good idea if the children have access to the materials themselves and not just passively looking at it. I could be saying to them, right, first of all, I want you to gather these, work with your partner and make the same materials as that we've got here, in this case, place value counters. Then I'm going to show you the written method, and then we're going to talk about it, and you're going to move them around and talk about it. Think Together 2. We're gradually here taking away some of the scaffolding so we can see that this is a word problem here. We're giving them the materials, and I might at this stage be saying, well, this is over to you now. In pairs, work on this, and then I'm going to do the listening, and you're going to tell me the answer. So we can flip the role from it being an I do to being a, well, you're going to do it, and then I'm going to listen to your thinking or query your thinking. So I've got options here about when they're projecting their ideas and when they're absorbing ideas, and I think that Think Together 1 and Think Together 2 often do give us that. I think a really strong part of this lesson is Think Together 3. I'm just going to leave that on the screen for just a moment for you to have a glance at that one. And then I think from an oracy point of view, I'm going to expect some clarification questions here. I'm going to expect the children to have slightly different ideas about what's being asked, because I think there are some potential ambiguities, and I'm okay with that here. I just need to look at the lesson beforehand and recognize it. So it says arrange the number cards to make these answers, but it looks to me like there are 2 sets of number cards. So just having given that pause and that quiet reflection time, I'm going to say to the class, do you know what? I find this a little bit confusing, and I'm going to ask you to help to explain this here. What do you think it means, arrange the number cards to make these answers? And just what we're going to have to do as a class is agree that actually what this is asking is that the number cards 1, 2, and 3 are going to be in the hundreds, tens, and ones, and I have to use those to complete these multiplications. So some combination of 1 and 2 and 3, some multiplied by 6 to give me the answer 738. And just that pause there. So I quite like the silence as a part of oracy as well. And it doesn't always have to be loud discussion. The oracy can be reflection time and then an opportunity to work on what we've been thinking about. I also think this question, so I don't think this was me that wrote this lesson. So I'm happy to say I think this question's really well designed. And sometimes it's buried in the lesson and you might miss it if you don't take a bit of time to think about it. This question could be solved by brute force. You could just try all the different ways of arranging the cards and work out the calculations and see which ones give you the answers you need. But actually, there is a lovely possibility for some generality in this one, where we could look at it and say, well, I know some of the digits already here, because 738 something multiplied by 6, you could say to yourself, well, do you know what? I know the 1 has to go in the hundreds there, because 2 hundreds multiplied by the 6 is already going to give me a number too big. So there's some opportunities for some really quite flexible thinking, and also some deeper mathematical reasoning and problem solving strategies. Also, I could look at the ones column here. And so what this question has buried in it is, well, look, 738 has a 8 in the ones place. Actually, only one of these digits in the ones place will give me an 8 in the ones place. So I know that must be 3, because that's the only digit that can multiply by 6 to give me an 8 in the ones place, which is some excellent reading, some efficient problem solving. And then if we've had a chance to think about that, I might start to say, can you just work together and think, can I do anything here with this one as well? Can I make a decision about the thousands place? Can I make a decision about the ones place based on that reasoning we've just had? So what Tony said about it, there have been lots of good questions. I really think there are lots and lots of good questions. In fact, you'll find them in every lesson, but the opportunities can be missed if we don't take that breath and that pause and that opportunity to have some of these metacognitive strategies that Tony was talking about. Just thinking about the thinking, or talking about the thinking, and then going backwards and forwards about the thinking, rather than just going in and trying to get the answers. And likewise, in this fourth one over here, we could have some justifications about that. Actually, and Tony mentioned the characters. That is nudged by one of the characters here. And so she is saying, I'll look at the last digit of each number to help me work out the answers. So that does prompt us to start thinking about that. So it's in there for teachers, and it's in there for students to find these things. But I really, really encourage you to just look out for these opportunities. Think together 3. This challenge question often has that really, really in it. So obviously the oracy around that could be really, really valuable. And then just going to have a look, really go through the independent work. So this is the workbook for that lesson, the write-in book. So here we go, question 1, question 2. There's, on the face of it, looks like a pretty clear-cut page of arithmetic, you might call it fluency, procedural fluency, learning the method, using the method, looking for accuracy. Even before we begin that, I think there are opportunities for oracy. So for example, I might say to the class, do you know what, I want you to, in a moment, I'm going to say, have a go at questions 1 and 2, but I'd just like you to share with someone near you, which question you're most confident about and why, or you could ask which question you're least confident about and why. But just that, even that, it's not a massive piece of oracy, it just could be a bit of pair work, but like that opportunity to think about your thinking and predict your thinking. And it might come out that they're saying, oh, I don't know. They might say, oh, E, I'm not confident about E because that's got a 7. I'm not very good at my 7 times table. And then that might open up the opportunity of saying, oh, yeah, you're right. Lots of us struggle with the 7 times table. Let's just quickly write the 7 times table on our flip chart. So that's there. And so when you get to that question, you can use your 7 times table. And they might say, which are you most confident about and why? And it might say, well, question 1, because it's got all of these place value counters. Oh, well, should we get some place value counters to check some of our answers for later on? I'd like to have, all of that's open there. Another question is, well, what could you say to someone to support someone who's worried about this one here? So maybe something like, oh, well, let's get our 6 times table ready for that one, because we know it's going to be about the 6 times table. Or you might say, well, 1 times 6, don't you? And actually, I think we know 3 times 6 because we did that earlier in the lesson. So it's just this 8 times 6 bit. That's the confusing thing there. So like, actually, you can do some of that question, but it's just this 8 times 6. You might have to do a bit of pause and a bit of work with that one. So there are opportunities for some good oracy questions there. Just flicking through that lesson, we've got this light bulb here. So, you might just say to them, before we begin, why do you think this light bulb's here? What is it about this question that you think makes it a light bulb question? And we've highlighted that all the way through as perhaps a slightly more challenging one, a think slightly differently one. So that's in there. But what is it about this question that makes that one worthy of having a light bulb in there? What is it that it's suggesting? So even before you begun, and then you can have something like that. Or I think oracy as well, sort of being able to communicate your ideas could be in writing, or just jot down what are your first thoughts about these kinds of problems. Then compare with someone else. Did you write something similar? Did you write, and they might say, oh, it's got missing digits. I I struggle with those because I can never work out if you have to exchange or not, and so detailed responses like that could be really, really powerful before they begin the work. Also, I think these open up more opportunities for the independent work actually to feel independent and free the teacher up to work with individual pupils, or to be able to move around the room in a more flowing way. Just on the last page of this one, we've got, so I mean, to me it seems fairly clear that there's a lot of opportunities for oracy here. Question 6, where there's been a mistake, clearly we can move that into, there might be particular talk roles, or there might be particular STEM sentences that we want them to be able to do, or think about how you could explain the answers to Alex, or the method to Alex, just seeing inside someone else's head. Question 7 here, which you'll probably notice is really close to Think Together 3. That could be really good partner work there. They could work together. They could actually have the digit cards. They could do that. And then as a teacher, I'm thinking, well, that's great. I can also generate other questions like that for those that finish, and it could be, or that I want to think slightly differently. I'd like you two to work together. Here are some digit cards. See what kind of answers you can get. Can you arrange them greatest to least? Can you arrange them some so they got something between 2,000 and 2,500 as the product? Lots of opportunities for slightly tweaking and moving on. And then each time the reflect has really clearly got opportunities for doing some oracy. It's not just about having to write something on those 3 lines. The idea is that the reflect is a chance to look back over the whole lesson, and I could make a really I could use that as a really good plenary time for the class, because what the reflect could be is a chance for them to have some quiet journaling time or jotting down time, and then at the end we reflect on that and say, and I often think this is the bit where, if at the end of the day, let's say Gran picks them up at the end of the school day and says, oh, what did you do in school today? What did you do in maths? This is the bit where I'd hope that they would say, oh, actually, I was explaining how to do this, or explaining that. This is the bit where I'd be like, that would be great if you said, rather than saying, I don't know, or we just did timesing. But this is the bit where I think reflect could be something like that. And it was saying that now, just thinking about, I wonder if there's some perhaps link with some home learning here. So oracy could take oracy into the home. Or could you really explain that to someone at home, what you were doing in maths today? How would you explain that to someone at home? And then hopefully in the morning on the playground, you can say, oh, you might get the parent coming up to you and saying this happened. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thanks very much for listening and for giving up your time. Hopefully that's given some specific ideas and some different ideas. I'll just say there's no way you could do all of those in one lesson. So it's just about spotting opportunities. And I'll just stop sharing there.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Tony and Josh, for that insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it and hope everyone else did too. Apparently you did such a fantastic job that we don't have that many questions for you. So well done there. However, we do have 2 that I've pulled out. So the first one is from Jack Smith. Thank you, Jack, who said, I teach my classes online and would like to know if either Tony or Josh have any further tips with using the virtual whiteboards or any other advice.
I nothing specific in terms of the virtual. I suppose I'm trying to work out, what do you mean, the online tools or just any virtual whiteboard really? So I think that the online tools within the Power Math suite, I think, are really useful, like to have the manipulatives and everything else there and available. But again, I think or if we're talking about any online tool, that like a tutoring tool or something that you can use, I think I'd use it in a similar way, where often in these programs, each individual children have got an opportunity to respond. And I think it's, again, about writing responses and then and asking that clarification. I think in all the stuff that Josh and I have spoken about, I think can be modelled, albeit it is slightly different within an online environment, really.
Yeah, could I just jump in and say, I think it's the same as using the materials. If you had the class with you, I think just it's about making having those discussions so that the representations or the materials, they don't replace the thinking. They're not a way of just getting at the answer. They're a way of being able to have a good discussion with a hook on the materials, with a hook on the written method, so that you can move between the two, rather than it just being, I'm using these materials to get an answer. It's like, oh, I wonder how these materials, why is it that these materials presented like this help and this written method both give us the answer, and what's the connection between the two? I think that would be my generic advice there.
Tara, great question. Maybe one we go away and have a think about a bit more as well, really.
Agreed. Yeah, worth thinking about for sure. The second question, just quickly, because I know we're coming up to time, is from Surendra Pal, who has said, there are students who are quiet and others and speak less. How can we include them in the discussion and talk, as we are talking about developing oracy?
Yeah, and again, I think this is a question that I think gets asked so many times, and it's an easy one to answer, but hard one to do. I genuinely believe, and I think I would say it's about making sure there's opportunity. Okay, I think using a whiteboard helps, like or journaling that Josh was talking about helps, because that at least gets the thinking out, and then the next step is to verbalize that thinking. But again, the tools that we've talked about in here about celebrating success, doing it in small group rather than having to do it with a whole class initially, etc. Do it with your pet, do it with a friend, etc. Use a bit of technology if possible, an iPad or something similar. I think it's just trying to reduce that fear barrier, because and looking at where maybe those children you're talking about are a bit more verbal, where are they a bit more, where do you see them being a bit more confident? Okay. I think those are things that I would say. Josh, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think Tony's just right about the opportunity. So the idea, I think what we've been talking about is that there are lots of opportunities for different types of like classroom work around oracy, and some of it might not be so much like I'm going to share my ideas with the whole class. It might be I've just on a tiny post-it note, I've jotted down my ideas, and then I've shared them quietly with the person next to me, or I've just compared them with the person next to me. Or as a teacher, you could say, well, would you mind if I had a go at saying some of those ideas, because they looked really interesting, what you'd written, jotted down on the post-it note there, or just really trying to gradually give them some confidence in the language that they're starting to use, and the ideas that they're starting to have, and the value in sharing ideas. Also, this way of not always asking questions which are what's the answer, or what's the best way of getting the answer, but let's have a think about this, or what might be a good first step, or those other ones about, or what do you think, which of these questions do you think you'll be most confident with, and why? Not what's the right answer, because that sometimes can be a block as well.
And Tara, the thing I would say is it takes time. Do you know, children that come to you, if you're a new class teacher of a class and you've got children who maybe lack confidence in just speaking because maybe it's because they're just a bit fearful of maths or an anxiety about maths, etc. It is going to take time to change that. And the way that we change it is by giving them confidence. And the way we give them confidence by them feeling successful, and all the things that we've talked about today, I think are ways that we can make children feel successful. Great question again.
Yeah, great question. And thank you. I love that sentiment. And I think it's important to build children up to be confident and give them the tools to be able to do that. So thank you so much. So we are at time. If we haven't answered any of your questions, we will go back to you via email. And if you have any further questions that should come up following today's session, then just don't hesitate to get in contact with us. You will receive an email afterwards thanking you for your attendance and with more details on the recording, etc. So brings us to the end of today's session. A big thank you to Tony, Josh, and all of our participants for joining. And thank you again, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you.